Okay, welcome everybody. Just go through some housekeeping as usual. Fire practice not expected. If the alarm sounds, can all present leave the building as quickly as possible by way of the nearest exit. Designated assembly point is in the public square in front of CAS, beyond the fountain, away from the civic office. Anybody with mobility issues, please wait in the refuge area at the top of the stairs where the emergency evacuation lift is located, and use the intercom situated to the left-hand side of the lift doors to call for assistance. No roll call will be undertaken. Thank you. Make sure your mobile phones are on silent. The meeting is audio-visually recorded and available to view on the Council's website and YouTube channel. Make sure you use your microphones when you speak. I know it's easy to forget, but it makes sure that all the whatever is said is actually captured. And if there are any members of the public, I don't think there are, but if they enter, they're accepting that their images will be retained and broadcast by the council. If you are visually recording, please make sure you only focus on what you are recording. Okay, introductions. First of all, I'd just like... Judith, would you like to introduce yourself? I do apologise, sorry, I realised you're not at a microphone. Thank you.
It's Councillor Jake Kearsley, Vice Chair of the Committee.
Councillor Jane Kidd, Chair of the Committee.
Caroline Martin, Senior Governance Officer supporting this meeting.
Tim Needham, Councillor for Armthorpe and Vice Chair today for Children and Young Peoples.
Glynis Smith, Chair of Health and Adult Social Care.
Steve Cox, Finley Ward.
Nigel Cannings, Tickhill and Wadworth Ward.
Lainey Ball, Cabinet Member for Early Help, Education, Skills and Young People.
Rachel Blake, Cabinet Member for Children, Social Care and Equalities.
Brianna Nelson, Director for Children's Services.
Morning, Lee Tillman, Assistant Director, Chief Executive Directorate.
Hi, Phil Holmes, Director of Adults, Wellbeing and Culture.
Morning, I'm Dave Richmond, I'm Chief Exec at St Ledger.
And Gemma Cobby, Councillor for Town Ward.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'd just like to do a few ground rules like I do occasionally. First of all, I'd like to thank the Cabinet members for attending and also thank Judith for giving the excellent questioning training that we all really enjoyed. Just reminded everybody to be courteous, go through the chair, listen to the answers and play an active role, even if you aren't actually speaking at the time. Limit any statements, as we are here to elicit information, and we do have limited time for our questions. Follow-up questions to dig a bit deeper are welcome. We will need to prioritise. We have set questions out in a priority order, but please be aware that it's possible and I may need to move on at some time. But there is always extra time. We meet every quarter. Be on the lookout for areas to feed into our work plans for a deeper dive, even if it's not something you bring up at the time, but always be looking for sort of information, subject areas where we could add value. So, I'll go into the main bit of the agenda. Apologies for absence. I've got apologies for Councillor Hempshaw, Councillor Majid Khan and Councillor Greenhall. Do we have?
No more.
Thank you. Consider the extent to which the public and press are to be excluded. There aren't any issues on the agenda. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. Minutes of the previous OSMC management meeting on the 12th of October. Are these agreed as a true record?
Agreed.
Thank you. We don't have any members of the public here for a public statement. So we will go on to the next section, which is the... Sorry, Caroline. Yeah, I'm looking at the right bit of... Thanks, Caroline. Can I just take that over there? We've got St Ledger Homes. We've moved this because I know, Dave, you have to go early. So we'll move on to questions from St Ledger Homes. First, we've got a question from Councillor Kearsley.
Morning, thank you. Looking at the overall picture, there are a good amount of KPIs that are red. But I feel from looking at the report that there's the narrative that things are still going in the right direction. But it looks like some are getting worse. I was just hoping you could maybe explain a bit more about the disparity between the narrative and the data, please.
Yep, I'll do my best, and I'm going to be at danger of telling you black is white here, or in this instance, red is really green. So I'll try not to patronise you in any way. But what I wanted to do was say, in the report, you can see 9 of the 22 indicators are red. There are a new set of indicators in there now because the government introduced what are called tenant satisfaction measures that you're well aware of, and we've included some of those, particularly in relation to compliance. But as you know, the way in which we set targets at the council and at St Ledger is it goes through a whole process at which ultimately the mayor decides what the target should be, and she's very exacting, to be honest. She sets quite stringent targets. So in a number of instances in this report, you will see targets that are red when actually they are top quartile for our comparators. So I just wanted to show this, and I'll send this through to you later. So this is an emerging picture because of the new TSMs coming out and people just collecting the data at the moment. We collected our data between May and September, and we've got the first indications of how that compares to other ALMOs, local authorities, and in fact all landlords. And on the perception measures, some of which are in this report, some of which there are 12 specific perception measures. What do tenants think about the overall service, what they think about complaints, what they think about property services, etc., etc. On of those 12 measures, we are in the top quartile. Sorry, of those 12, we are in the top quartile in 11. In the other measure, we are in the median quartile. And Caroline, if you could put that email up at some point, that'd be really interesting. And what we also now know is, because I've received a report in the last few days from Housemark, the National Benchmarking Agency, is that ALMOs on all of the TSMs outperform local authorities considerably. Local authorities also, in some instances, outperform housing associations. So on this one, for example, which is the overall satisfaction measure, which is one of the issues that you're referring to as in decline, you will see that the yellow line is the ALMO median line, the average for ALMOs. The blue line is the median for local authorities. There is national decline, and that would be mirrored for all landlords. So there's a new measure that's been introduced that's changed the way in which it's captured, and as a result of that and other factors going on, you're seeing a national decline. On our measure, we are bang on the median for this one, so we are at 76. Local authorities, median is 65, so there's a considerable gap. So if I just take you through some of those targets in more detail, specifically as they relate to us. So KPIs 4 and 5, sorry, start off with the void targets. Sorry, let me start off with 4 and 5. I'm just switching between different reports. Sorry about this. Just give me 1 second, I'll get it up. Okay, so if I just deal with the reds that we've got in the report. So KPI 2 and 3. So this is void rent loss and this is average turnaround times. On both we are red. And we're red because the mayor has set very exacting targets. On both we are top quartile performance. So we are in the best 25% in the country. In actual fact, in turnaround times, we are considerably well within that 25%. So that's why in some of the commentary, it's saying actually, whilst it's red, it is actually nonetheless very good performance. It's just that we aspire to have even better performance, quite rightly so. On KPIs 4 and 5, which is hotel usage and full duty acceptances for homelessness, in essence, we're tracking the Yorkshire and Humber average, and we're pretty much on average for Yorkshire and Humber. On the full duty acceptances issue, we made a mistake in setting the target. We took some advice from DLUC. DLUC had new data, which was subsequently proven to be inaccurate. And it was also what we've seen in the last year is a massive increase in homelessness. That's not just a Doncaster issue, that is a national issue. So we've now got something like 125,000 people in temporary accommodation in the country, of which, in this report, we had 44. So we're following national trends. In part, on this issue, it's as I say, on the acceptances one, we got the target wrong. We should have been about 60, we set it at 30. So we made a bit of a mistake, and hopefully we'll correct that this year. So it is absolutely an issue that we need to focus on. It's absolutely an issue that we're working very tightly on with colleagues in the council, and it is an issue of severe concern. I'm not diminishing that one little bit. However, it is not just a Doncaster issue, it's a national issue, and we're seeing significant similar things elsewhere. KPI 6 is the complaints issue, and if I'm honest, in the report, this is my greatest concern. We do get too many complaints. We're actually in bottom quartile for this. I think it's a reflection of a number of things. Predominantly, most of our complaints relate to repairs and maintenance. As you know, we suspended our scheduled repairs service last year whilst we put everything into one service, because we used to have an emergency team and a scheduled team, and we brought them together, and we actually triaged and scheduled low order scheduled repairs, and we paused them. And I think in part it's a reflection of that. The other thing it's a reflection of is within our repairs and maintenance complaints, the highest category of complaints relates to policy issues. So this is where tenants think that our timescales or our standards are not what they expect. And in some instances, it would be quite possible to game some of these indicators. So, for example, on the timescale indicator, some landlords have an emergency timescale and then they have an appointment timescale. So that appointment is not necessarily within 5 days, 7 days, 28 days as we do. It's a mutually agreed appointment. So you can never really be wrong on that. Whereas because we set 2 hours, 24 hours, 5 days and 28 days, we've got hard targets that we're up against that potentially we fall foul of. And as a result, we take complaints on that because we haven't met them. If we set lower targets, we'd meet them much more easily and our performance would look much better. That's not to diminish the sense that actually we do need to do more repairs and do them more quickly. And I think we've talked previously about all the work we've done about changing the repair service and the improvements we've made there. KPI 11 is sickness, and we're off target there. We set a much higher target for St Ledger than was set for the council, and basically we're tracking on about the council average. Again, it's not where we want to be. We've done a lot of work this year changing our triggers, changing our training for our staff in terms of managing that, and I've got to say we have seen some fluctuating performance as those triggers start to hit. So I'm hopeful that they will have an impact and become good, but at the moment it's still a bit of a problem. KPI 12 is the local expenditure target, which is also off target, and we set an ambitious target based on past performance. The dilemma for us on this one is we change contractors, which is the majority of our main spend. We had, as you know, we predominantly deliver repairs in-house, but we also use contractors where we've got seasonal work or where we've got additional work that we want to do or more specialist work. We were with a company called Tomlinson's, who are a Nottingham-based company, but they had a local Doncaster office. So that counted as local expenditure, although they're a national Nottingham-based company. And basically, they went into receivership, as I understand it. So we had to switch contractors. And whilst we went out to procurement and we tried very hard to get local Doncaster contractors, actually we've got a mix, some of which are Yorkshire and Humber-based, one of which is national. And the other thing that's mainly impacted on this indicator is the significant spend we've got going on Balby Bridge at the moment. As you're aware, on those high-rise, we're stripping off all the insulation and putting new back on, and that's with a national contractor. So in terms of can I spend locally, I'm tied by procurement and availability of contractors, and that's going to be really difficult. And to be honest, I just won't meet that target. We won't get there. That's not to say that where we've got national contractors like Mia's working for us, they don't employ local people. In actual fact, the money ends up locally, but in terms of the way it's accounted for, it's accounted because their head office is in Swindon or wherever. ASB 13, the KPI 13 in ASB is also in the lower quartile performance. So that is a major concern for us. As you know, we introduced a dedicated ASB team in May, and we're starting to see that having some impact and improving performance. That said, in terms of reports of ASB, actually we are below the Yorkshire and Humber average. So we're much higher than the national average, you know, when you take into account, you know, the Leafy Home suburbs, etc., and North Yorkshire and what have you. But in terms of Yorkshire and Humber, we're tracking below the Yorkshire and Humber average. And then the last one off target is the tenant satisfaction measure, which is the TSM, which is the one I've got up on the screen, showing you that, yes, it's gone down compared to what we would do previously, but so has everybody's, and actually in comparison, it's pretty decent. So that's the explanation of those specifics. Basically, what I'd say to you is that there is a difficulty in comparing performance in this report, because what you get is the outturn performance, quarter 4 for last year, and the first 2 quarters of this year. Where we are in the middle of the year might not be the same as where we'll be at the end of the year. So, for example, a good example on this is the ASB indicator. So what we traditionally see is that reports of ASB, particularly things like noise nuisance, dogs barking, that sort of stuff, goes up in the summer. And actually in the winter, when people are less outdoors, the numbers come down. So, but what we did on that indicator, we got the final figure of 60, we divided it by 12, and we've got a linear trajectory. So actually we're going above that linear in the summer months, but as the winter kicks in, we'll go below it, and we should end up round about target. So it's difficult comparing just on the little bits you've got in front of you. Then there's the new TSMs that I've mentioned, and the different methodology on things that look similar. We've always had an indicator on overall satisfaction, but it's measured slightly differently. There's the national decline issues that I've referenced. So that's basically what I'd say. So, you know, it's a great question, and it vexes us greatly when we see that, because it means we have to dig even further to understand it. But actually, when you do dig under it, and that's why I think the annotation in the report differs from some of the figures, because it's actually trying to explain some of those underlying trends and what's going on.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, that was really informative, and I know that I feel that maybe it's just I understand the need to have, and obviously you've discussed about how, you know, for different KPIs, maybe there's different stakeholders involved in setting the targets and things like that. Just feels strange to me that you can have one KPI that is showing as worse than target in red, that's still in the top quartile, and then you've got another one that's exactly the same but is in the bottom quartile. So I feel that just seems a little bit strange to me. In light of that, I mean, how confident can you be that they're going to improve? I mean, I know, you know, I'm all for having a big goal, a challenging target to meet, but I'm also aware that you've got to kind of, I don't think it does, you know, when you look at a report like this and you can see red, you know, you've got to manage expectations as well. And, you know, morale is something that I feel that can be affected by something like this. I mean, for an example of like and there's also, we've got to deal with things that are, sorry, I'm losing my words here a little bit, that are not things we can't necessarily influence. For instance, we could have the most challenging, the most sort of out there target for rough sleeping and homelessness, but we know from experience that a massive proportion of that cohort just do not want to accept help. So, you know, so we could say we want 100% of people off the streets, and if we don't achieve that, then we're doing really badly. But actually, if we can't influence 60% of those people, all we're doing is kicking the people doing the work down and saying you're doing a bad job, you need to do better, when it's completely out of their hands, maybe. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. So, base position, I'd say, is we want to improve and we want to get better and we want to stretch ourselves. And the Mayor sets the targets on that basis. And we go in with stretch targets in the first instance. It's then about what is a reasonable stretch and what isn't. So, on some of these, I'm confident that we're going to get there or thereabouts. ASB is the one I've mentioned. Some I'm not confident, and I've openly said that. So, on the void's turnaround figure of 20 days, you know, we are miles better than Barnsley, Rotherham, Sheffield, and most others. I'm not confident we'll get to 20 days. Could we get what you actually see when you look at this over the last 2 years and you look at it month by month, we're shaving off a percentage of a point each month. So it's coming down very slowly. We could get realistically to 24.5 probably in year, but we won't get to 20. So in some instances we won't. Other indicators where I won't achieve it are the one I mentioned in terms of local expenditure. I know those contracts are, and with the best will in the world, we would have loved just having Doncaster contractors, but if they're not there that can do the work in the right quantity and right quality, then we can't go with them. So it's a real mixed picture, but you make a really good point, actually. We've just had feedback from a company we brought in to help us get ready for the forthcoming inspection regime, and they commented exactly as you did, particularly in respect of the void turnaround target. That actually, and I've openly said, in Cabinet, that we could hit that target. We could hit that target. If I threw another £1 million or so at that target, we'd get there. But actually, would it be proportionate to what we've actually achieved? One of the things that we've done this year is on our voids, we changed the consumer units. So that takes us another day or two to get, I could stop doing that and we could have the disruption for somebody that they've got no electrics for a day or so while we change the consumer unit whilst they're in situ. But we've chosen to do things like that impact on it. So we could get there, but do we realistically, is that the right thing to do to give people a lower standard of repairs? Is it the right thing to do to spend all that extra money for a few days? So in some instances, no, we won't. Some we will. It's a real mixed picture depending on each indicator.
Can I just ask a very quick question, because I'm just keeping on that, I'm being tight on time today. So the satisfaction survey, and we talked about some of the issues around repairs, because repairs are really up there with our residents' concerns. Is there a plan in place to sort of look at that satisfaction survey and address what needs addressing?
Well, to be honest, we're not dependent on the satisfaction survey. Okay. We knew this already. We knew what we had to do. And when you look at the repairs issues, absolutely. We've got the full Repairs Excellence programme, which I know we've talked about before, where we've got a whole raft of measures that we're doing to improve the repairs service. So absolutely, there's a whole raft of work going on behind that. The move to just having one repairs team was the most significant thing, but as you know, we did things like the dial ahead and the text ahead, to try and avoid having unnecessary visits when tenants were out. We've done a raft of things to try and improve that, and we are getting there bit by bit, but it's a high volume 70,000 repairs a year business, so it does take time.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else want to pick up anything before we move on? Steve?
I just want to say thank you for your report and for explaining. I mean, I think Jake, cracking job with the questions that he's just asked, but it'd be nice. I think, like Jake's saying, is that I think the targets, obviously, as you've said, are potentially set too high, and I think that feeling when we see red in reports, obviously upsets some people within there. And your explanation were great, but it'd be nice to see realistic targets within reports.
I think it does us a disservice as the city of Doncaster, if I'm honest, where we know we're better than the national average. We know, we've got the 9th lowest rents in the country, and to some degree, you can outperform the resources you've got, but ultimately that does have a bearing. Yeah, I think, I've got to say that this has been the subject of numerous conversations, and I've already been having conversations with the Mayor about targets for next year, and could we just make them a little bit more achievable? Because I do think it reflects badly. If you don't understand the detail of this, you look at this report, you see, 45% of them as red indicators, and you think we're not doing well. Well, actually, in some instances, and not all, and I put my hand up where we're not, but in some instances, we're doing really well.
We do actually have recommendations, page 11, paragraph 3. The committee has asked to note the progress of St Leger Homes' performance outcomes and the contribution it makes to supporting City of Doncaster Council's strategic priorities. Caroline, are we able to put a comment in there that we do acknowledge that some of these targets are very, very stretched, and we, you know, we'll work the wording out. Is that okay with everybody? Okay, thank you. This is going to give me anxiety dreams, having all these bits of paper everywhere going from one. And I was meeting early and having sent like a ledger homes first. But thank you very much for that. Thank you. So we're moving on to section 7. The Cabinet has actually given consideration to and approved the report that's presented to us today. So it's now our opportunity to comment on the information provided, and I'm going to hand over to Lee for the usual short introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. I'll just say a few words by way of context for quarter 2. We always, I think it's really important that we do this, always try and put our performance into a context. So what's happening nationally, globally, things that are going to impact on performance, going to impact on people's experience of the things that we're trying to achieve as City of Doncaster Council. And quarter 2 is no different. And I guess it's worth saying, we all know this, but it's just worth putting some of that into context. So we've got continued conflict in Ukraine. We've got in quarter 2, we saw the start of the Middle East conflict, and we're also seeing falling but still very high levels of inflation. There were, as at quarter 2, when we produced this report, inflation was at 6.7% in September. Obviously, it's still it's reduced further since. But we have to, I guess, recognise those cost of living pressures that our communities and residents are feeling, which is compounded by those high interest rates and those continued increases in the cost of borrowing that we've seen over the last sort of 24 months or so. And a lot of that is now priced into our system. So it impacts on the council's finances through things like inflation, fuel costs, etc., as well as our communities and residents and the impact that they're feeling as well. So that's going to continue, and I think that volatility that we see internationally and the shocks that we see on the economy are going to continue, and that's going to continue to provide a kind of very challenging context for us as we operate into quarter 3 and beyond. And our plans, they always do feel like they're tested, but we always say that every quarter, but they continue to be tested quarter by quarter, and obviously our role to support our communities and businesses in the most difficult of times is more important than ever. So with that in mind, I think the council's overall performance is relatively good and relatively strong. We've seen, and we continue to see, some real sort of challenging scenarios from other councils, particularly around their finances. Obviously, Doncaster's not in that position. We are still experiencing an overspend. Our projected year-end overspend is 1.7 million as at quarter 2. That's come down significantly from quarter 1, when it was projected to be a 4.2 million overspend, and we've used some in-year underspends and one-off resources to try and reduce that. We're obviously continuing to see pressures in adults and children's services, and I'm sure we'll come into that as we get into the questions. So overall, the financial position is challenging but has improved, and when you compare us to many other places, you know, we're not in a bad position, and that also feeds into our performance stats. And as we always do, we set these out against our Grade 8 priorities. And we've got 81 measures, of which the vast majority, 46, are either on track or close to target. So that, if you take the data-only measures out, that's 66.6% are on track or close to on track. And we have a small number, 12, that are off track. So the only other thing just to say before we get into the questions is that we've also done a new assessment on our strategic risks. We keep those updated every quarter. And as I mentioned right at the start, obviously our context is challenging and changes all the time. So it's really important that we keep those strategic risks under review and make sure that we've got where we can. And thinking about the last conversation, not everything is within our control clearly, but where we can have mitigations in place to address those risks, and they're set out at paragraph 173. So hopefully that's okay, Chair, just a quick introduction to the report.
Thank you very much for that. Got a question from Antoinette?
Morning. Thank you for that. It's good to hear that the projected overspend's down by quite a substantial amount. But my question is around the Direct Schools grant, and the report states that strategically senior education leads in the council are liaising with schools who are finding it equally difficult financially at the moment. But liaising with schools regarding the devolution of elements of the DSG to ensure locally there are right places, the right services in place to support children, improving outcomes and reducing costs, which is what we all want. But what is it going to look like, and how is it going to work, and how do we know it's going to be better?
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to the senior education leader who sat right next to me, who can probably answer this a lot better than I can, so if that's okay. Thank you.
I'm hoping I can. So, Antoinette, thank you very much for that question. So we know from evidence that we've seen and working within the system that SEND funding is where you allocate SEND funding according to need in the most earliest opportunity through robust identification. We know that that creates efficiency and transparency within the overall high needs block, and it's better for children, as we know, because we keep those children within mainstream school. We know that the new system will deliver a much more coherent system for us of allocating resources, and that this will be improved process for decision making because it will be done transparent, and because schools will be holding each other to account, and we will convene and quality assure it as a local authority. We've worked with various councils from across the country, and we've compared a number of systems, and the one that we are trying to actually implement we've tested in one of the other local authorities. And what they have seen is they have had a very divergent picture from the national average. So just to give you an idea, in 2022, they had no high needs block deficit and a 1.93% EHCP rate, and the average national rate is 4.3. Special school population is 0.99%, and the national average is 1.67. 7.9% growth in specialist placements over 3 years, where the national average is 21.9%, and we see that escalation of needing more specialist provision locally as well. So there is definitely evidence that implementing a devolution system works. In terms of how it will work, we're working with Achieving Better Value in SEND, so it's a DFE initiative, and we've got a SEND funding expert that's working with us that oversees the implementation of the plan, and it reports to our school forum, who's the accountable body for designated school grants. The basic components of it is we're going to review the notional budget per pupil that's allocated through SEND. That's normally about £6,000. We know that that's not necessarily sufficient, so we're going to review that and make sure that we adjust that. We're going to identify the overall amounts for each locality through the agreed formula. So rather than thinking about SEND funding per school, we are thinking about these economies of scale of devolving that money per locality, and that schools then can bid for funding to support their school pupils. Our specialist support service will check the accuracy of the identification of needs, so we will check that that's robust, and that each school, that each child is getting their needs met within the graduated approach that we are implementing. Schools make funding requests to annual panel for 6 weekly interim funding, and schools are held to account for the delivery of the provision in accordance with the plan. Schools at different phases collaborate to develop different funding requests. So it's about collaboration, it's about joint ownership and accountability, and the local authority playing their role as conveners and quality assurance of the system.
So are we talking putting more money into early identification and support to ensure that children aren't actually then moving into EHCs and often special school places? So if that's the case, how are we going to ensure that that is robustly done? I understand if you're giving amounts of money to a locality and schools bid into that, sometimes the loudest voices get the most. So how are we going to quality assure that that actually works well and efficiently and effectively for the children, the schools involved?
How much time do you have? So just to give you an overview, so our SEND strategy talks about a graduated approach. And that graduated approach means that we tool up schools to support children within school with the identification and the support within schools. And there is a toolkit that we've produced and that we're implementing across. And we've got a SENCO network that we constantly are working with, upskilling people in terms of identification, in terms of the graduated approach. As children present with more complex needs, they move through that graduated approach. And at all cost, we are trying to keep children within communities. So we provide, and later on we'll talk a little bit about the provisions that we are putting in place. So rather than building big new special schools, which we are limited in being able to do so, we are creating things like social, emotional, mental health hubs, which is attached, remains attached to schools, and it's a support system for schools for those children, so that they still can access mainstream school. If that isn't sufficient, we are developing a range of different alternative provision, again with the focus of doing short interventions, normally about 12 weeks, to return children back into mainstream school. And only when children's education, health and care plan absolutely indicates that the special provision is required, we will then we'll go through the EHC process in identifying that specialist provision. In terms of I've mentioned the specialist service, our support service, those are the people that will be checking the quality of assessments, checking that the provisions are providing what it should be doing, and then reporting back against holding the schools to account for the plans that they put in place.
Can I just, So 2 questions there. Notional funding currently is 6,000, but really notional funding doesn't exist as 6,000 per special needs child in your school. So upping notional funding doesn't necessarily support schools. And the notional funding, if you have a lot of SENs in a small school, causes schools to have quite significant budgetary problems and then can't provide the support that's required. How do we ensure that the schools get the funding they need to provide this alternate way of ensuring that children get this early intervention quickly and effectively and on budget?
So we know nationally that the system is not working, and that it is broken. And if you look at the overspends through DSG, that's an absolute testament of how broken the system is, and that there is not enough funding within the system. And so, our DSG budget, although the majority of that money goes into schools directly because of that's direct schools funding, we have got the high needs block. And the high needs block is supposed to be funding the additional capacity. Now, Doncaster is in a position where we are heading for a £38 million overspend in the next 3 years. That's indicative nationally. There's other local authorities that are in a much worse position. And that's because there isn't enough funding within the system. So your point about a notional funding being adequate for schools or not adequate for schools, I would totally agree. That's why we're re-looking at the formula. Will there be enough? Most probably not. But it's about how we cut the cloth and how do we co-produce with schools a equitable and fair system for all.
I think that's something we'd need to keep an eye on.
Councillor Cox, can I suggest that you get a written answer to your question, but it is something we will pursue. We need to move on to the Cabinet members' areas. So thank you. Thank you very much for that. We're now moving on to the area where the Cabinet members are going to take some questions. So we've got, first question is from Councillor Guinness-Smith. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So in view of the lack of funds around the Choose Kindness campaign, how are you going to introduce it across Doncaster?
Thanks very much, Glynis. We've been working on Choose Kindness now for the last year without a budget, and I think it's true to say that the work we've achieved has been tremendous, and that's because people's time, interest, effort doesn't actually cost anything. And where we have needed to do things such as we're getting some money for stickers, for instance, because the group is really keen that if businesses, organisations, community groups have taken the pledge, then that's visible. So we have a tiny budget to be able to do things like that. But it's basically made up of goodwill, which is how the Choose Kindness movement started, with people coming together, wanting to promote all the wonderful things that happen in Doncaster, but also start to challenge things that aren't that kind. And we had our meeting, for instance, our workshop on Friday, where we planned what's going to happen next. All councillors will be invited to get more involved in their local area, building on the work that you're all doing already. It's not asking you to do anything else. The beauty of Choose Kindness is it's part of Team Doncaster. So we have partners that can contribute when we need to do things, when we need to sponsor things, and that's the approach that we've taken. And I think that's probably because as a council, we're used to begging, borrowing, stealing. That's just the way that I think everybody involved in the group works. And so, for instance, when we did the big launch at Cusworth Hall, that was because one of the artist, Wayne, was already doing an event and said to us, do you want to come on the back of this? It won't cost you anything. I've got all the equipment anyway, but please share the opportunity. Same with DBTH, when they had their awards, they said, do you want us to put Choose Kindness on? Didn't cost us anything. We've sponsored a penguin. It's not cost us anything, because I think that's just how people work. And I think that's good. I think sometimes when you have a huge budget, people apply for things and almost make things up that they think they might need, whereas because the movement has been so organic, that people don't have to bid for things, they don't have to write a funding application, they almost just get on and do it. So I was in here recently, I'm not sure if anybody else was, talking to the parish and town councils, you know, the JCC thing. I always get the names mixed up, but the Joint Consultative Parish and Town Councils. And on the back of that, we've then had invites to things that parish and town councils are doing. They're already paying for that. We're just being asked to go along and put our logo on. We've had great support from our comms teams, across Team Doncaster, at no cost. You know, we have a toolkit that's all online. That's the approach we've taken. You've got posters that you can print off. So I think for me, it's just carrying on how we've worked as a council for some time. And we even have workshops where everybody brings food for each other as well, as we did on Friday. And we had a bit left, so we gave that to the food bank. And I think that's just the essence of the group.
Councillor Smith, I was just going to ask a question. Is that okay, or do you want to come in after that? I just wanted to ask a question about frontline staff, people in the civic office on the phones. How much do you think they are part of the Choose Kindness? Because it's obviously extremely important, because they're the face of the council and they meet people, vulnerable people trying to find the way into the system.
Shall I pick that up? Yeah, because we've got, I'll say, and then Lee will come in. So yeah, we've talked about this for some time, that as a council, obviously our first kindness is to our staff, is very much my approach, particularly our frontline staff, and how much they do. If our staff don't feel supported and included in that movement, then that obviously will have an impact on... Sorry,
I meant specifically how they deal with vulnerable people. The staff themselves, they're fully trained to be able to deal with vulnerable people. I've got some anecdotal evidence that it falls down sometimes. So I just wanted to ask you the question.
Yeah, that's. I'll let Lee come in, because we're about to do a specific piece of work on the back of Choose Kindness, Jane.
So just as an example, we do train our staff for particular circumstances and contexts. So again, as an example, one of the things that's happened in the last couple of months is all of street scene have been trained around how to engage with customers, how to de-escalate situations, how to approach things in a kind of pragmatic way, rather than sometimes things can go the other way, shall we say. So I think that's an example of where we try and make sure that our staff are trained for particular contexts and circumstances that they're in, particularly when they're dealing with difficult situations. We're also introducing the Choose Kindness approach into the one-stop shop. You'll probably see there's some banners in there already for Choose Kindness, and we are looking to we're looking to redesign the one-stop shop over the next 6 months, and as we do that, we'll be embedding some of the logos and the livery, as well as the training around the kind of choose kindness approach with our team. So they're just 2 examples. There's many more, and obviously it's going to be a constant process around how we make sure our teams are trained as appropriately for the circumstances that they're working in.
Can I just ask a question? Will all equality groups be consulted? Because that's something that I really hear a lot about at One Stop Shop. All equality groups consulted how it can be improved.
Absolutely, absolutely we will. And that's a plan for 24. We've not started that yet, but that's going to be a plan for 2024.
And thanks to you, Jane, we've met Toya, for example, who you introduced us to. She's been in to see us. And we've started that conversation about how we can raise awareness. I think the vision when we started Choose Kindness, that if organisations, for instance, have taken the pledge, whether that's the co-op or whether that's the council, there's almost some basics that people will get when they go in. So, for instance, people know the basic sign-in. They know how to access something perhaps in different languages. There may be the basics there around access, and that's certainly where I think the people involved are really keen to get the movement to. So you've almost got that quality assured experience if you're dealing with any organisation that has taken the pledge.
So I know this is not directly related to the question, but I think it underpins the answers that we've given. Is we're doing some work around the equality framework for local government as well, which is a national framework which organisations can assess how they're performing against that equality framework. We're just currently doing some baselining work against that across the organisation, and that looks at a number of factors. So how well we engage with communities, how well we adapt our services, how well we know our communities, and how well we're adjusting in response. So again, through 2024, the results of that baseline and then the implementation of any recommendations off the back of that will underpin some of the things that we've just been discussing. And that, as I say, is a nationally agreed LGA framework.
Thank you very much. I do apologise, Councillor Smith, but would you like to carry? I don't know if you've got any supplementary questions to that bit.
It's not a question, really. It's just a promise that Hatfield will be more involved, Rachel. Shall I do my next question? So what can you tell us regarding the quality of social work practice, particularly the progress that's been made since the trust transferred to the council?
Okay, thank you very much, Glynis, for the question. And I think it's true to say that the conversations we have with directors, we talk an awful lot about the quality of social work practice. So we look at that from an internal perspective, but also I'm going to talk about the external things that we do as well. So the service improvement is coordinated in a quality improvement plan, and the progress of this plan is triangulated with findings from an ongoing audit and dip sampling activity with an evidence challenge panel. We monitor the impact of improvement activity through service level performance reporting meetings, which inform directorate-wide practice improvement and performance boards, with the performance board triangulating performance management information with HR and financial data. In recognition of the increasing maturity of these arrangements, we agreed with the DFE that their support in these meetings was no longer necessary, and they are now chaired by Rihanna as the DCS. So in addition to that internal measure that we have, we also, wherever possible, externally evaluate to triangulate our views about the quality of services that we provide. Over the past 3 months, we've had the support of our sector-led improvement partner to support with focusing on key areas of the quality and improvement planning. That partner is from Salford Local Authority, and they've been working with us to explore practice, to consider what is working well and what needs to be strengthened. These measures provide ongoing scrutiny of the quality of practice and progress made against agreed priorities. There is evidence of very good progress being made. We currently have the lowest number of children and young people placed in external provision that there has been for a number of years. And this is a consequence of our focus on keeping Doncaster children in Doncaster whenever we can safely. In the most recently completed audit report, the majority of work undertaken was judged to be good or better in terms of its impact on children and families. Recent dip sampling activity indicates that most assessments are good. However, we recognise that more work needs to be done to increase consistency and get them all good. Recruitment of social work staff is a national challenge, but we've recently recruited a small number of experienced staff, which means, for example, that we shortly have no agency, team managers, advanced practitioners in our assessment service or in our out-of-hours teams. This shows that we have that steady workforce, those green shoots, linked to building our positive reputation linked to recruitment. And over the past few months, we've recruited 15 ASYE staff and anticipate recruiting a further cohort of 16 staff by April 2024. So there's a positive trajectory in relation to the quality of supervision staff receive, and we've seen a significant improvement in the reflective content of this aspect of our work. And over the past few weeks, the sector-led improvement partner has been reviewing the MACE panel and the multi-agency partnership work that sits within its remit, linked to how we work to safeguarding and prevent harm through child exploitation. This feedback we've had from Salford has been really strong, highlighting the excellent partnership working, and chairing of the panel means we manage risk well. And I think on top of that, you know, myself and Lainey, we visit regularly. We have a programme of visiting our children's social care staff. We have those discussions. I think there's also that, because so many people are now back into the building and they are coming into the building on a regular basis and they are expected to within children's social care, it's that opportunity, isn't it, to have that discussion about what do you think about this? This is what I'm thinking about. And I think often in the work that, you know, the very intense work that our children's social care staff, having that support, peer mentoring, but also a really clear direction from our director and assistant directors about the standards and practice we expect, which obviously we as cabinet members support as well.
Okay, thanks for that. I've just got a... So I think the one that kind of hit me in the face most was no agency, which is extremely positive. Is the arrangement with Salford a two-way process? So do we support them in the same way as they're supporting us?
Yeah, just a little further detail, just for clarification, we don't have no agency. We have reduced the agency numbers in terms of team managers and advanced practitioners. We still do have around 40 agency workers, and we know that that creates inconsistent practice. So that's why we've got this massive recruitment drive around recruiting newly qualified social workers, the 15 cohort that we've just recruited, and another 16 in April time that we will be recruiting and putting through a really robust induction program, which we have designed to link in with our values, our systems, our standards of practice. So we're hoping that by next year, April, we will see a definite turn in terms of the stability of the workforce. I just wanted to clarify that, Councillor Smith. In terms of our relationship with the sector-led improvement partner from Salford, that's actually through the Department of Education. They offered us and said, is there any areas that you would like external scrutiny or consideration and support in? We said these are the kind of areas we are thinking about, and they connected us with Salford, who's an outstanding authority. And they are identified as one of the sector-led improvement partners. It isn't, although it's not formally it isn't a two-way conversation, but informally, for example, they looked at our multi-agency exploitation panel, the MACE panel, and they've picked up some really good practice there that they're now going to implement in Salford. So in that way, informally, we establish really good relationships and we share that practice. And when the formal contract for Salford finishes in the next 2 or 3 months, that relationship will continue anyway on an informal basis. So we create that network and it becomes a two-way street. Because I think it's really important for us to be outward looking, learning from other local authorities, but also offering what we can offer to them to learn from us.
Can I just ask, and I appreciate it's probably in the report, how is the quality of supervision actually measured? Is it a KPI and is it getting better?
Yeah, through our auditing. So we audit supervisions on a regular basis. So that's through direct observations, but also actually auditing the supervision record in terms of reflection, analysis, and whether that supervision drives outcomes for children and young people and impact. So we still know that our supervision is getting better, but it's still variable. So we're investing a lot of time in supervision, training and support for our team managers, as well as assessment. We know our assessments are inconsistent still.
Okay, thank you. So it is actually variable, but okay.
But definitely improving.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so is that all right? Councillor Smith, do you have any more questions? Okay, thank you. In that case, we're moving on to a question to Councillor Annie May Ball. Councillor Kearsey, you've got a question?
Thank you. What can you tell us about the Your Family offer? Could you explain what this is and how it works, please?
Yeah, thank you for your question. And I'm quite excited to be able to talk about the Your Family offer. It's our service that we've got that's embedded in communities across Doncaster, across the 4 localities. And basically what we wanted to do with the Your Family offer was to have a team in communities that people could access and be able to get information and guidance from families to residents on everyday issues that can quickly spiral or become quite difficult or escalate as well. So what we've done is we've got a wide range of teams that are based in a certain location. So for example, Woodlands Library, Civic for Doncaster Central, Vermoyden Centre in Thorn, and then Tom Hill Youth Club in Dennerby as well. So it's teams that are sat together, that are working together, where people can just pop in and have that conversation. It can be on the phone, it can be via email. Mainly it's through face-to-face. People just want to be able to go in and speak to a professional on an array of issues. And that covers benefits, family support, accessing local groups or activities. So if the family hubs have got any activities for parents, being able to access that. Childcare issues, antisocial behaviour, housing support, employment or debt or financial problems. We're really focused around providing that educational support for families as well, so if it's behavioural or children not accessing their education. And we've also got our adult family community learning officers out there as well, so if any adults want to step into learning or get that advice. So it is quite far-ranging what their offer is to communities. And the service itself utilises the Supporting Families framework. So that ensures that the conversations had with the families, all the needs are identified and addressed by a lead practitioner. And then they create sort of like a family plan with them and discuss what the actions are going to be going forward. The part of the Your Family offer is that we wanted that early help. So you see that term early help chucked around quite a lot, and you see as things progress, and if it's not dealt with, it can then potentially go into social care. So we want it at a hyper-local level, we want it accessible, and we want to be able to deal with issues as they arise really, really quickly. So we're calling it that local help, so it's there for people. The vast majority of the cases that come through, they call it a see it and solve, they're usually dealt with within 1 hour. Small number of them then go on to further referrals if they need to, but that team coordinates that response and that support package for that family as well. And what we don't want, and sometimes we get feedback from families or residents, is that experience of being passed from team to team and it being really difficult to have that single point of contact and information getting lost or not being able to get in contact with that one person that they've built up a bit of rapport. So Your Family's, the lead practitioner's role is to delegate them cases out, but to have that single point of contact for that family as well. So it's only been launched for 12 months. There's been a steady increase in the amount of referrals that we've had for families seeking support. In the last year, there's been a 45% increase in people accessing it. So it went from 1,301 to 2,853 per quarter. So a lot of these are self-referral, so that's a good sign. It means that people know that it's there so they can take themselves off and get that help. That's one of our key aims of the model. Some of the main issues are, and I'm sure as ward councillors you're not surprised by any of this, but it's housing, finance difficulties that we've got, and also residents struggling to access the benefits. In terms of the value for money aspect of your question, it is finance from supporting families grants, so it's not a core part of the council's budget, it's from an external part of money, and it's around 450k per year for that to be able to operate. I cannot stress enough that it's value for money in the fact that it stops more expensive interventions that are required for families. And a lot of areas across the country have cut early help, and we're in a position where we're investing in early help that's embedded within communities. So it might have that cost associated with it, but we are saving a lot of money further down the line, and also a lot of stress and distress for families and residents as well. And we just continue to review it. Now it's been a year, we've been looking at how people have been accessing the service, so that review is ongoing.
That's great, thank you.
Can I just ask what additionality it adds? Because I understand that we on our ward reports, we talk about the sort of families that are in struggling, and how stronger communities actually has been working with them for a long time. That sort of it's exactly the same sort of thing. So can you just tell me what the additionality is for this particular system?
Yeah, and then I'll just bring Rihanna in to be able to give that operational detail. So the teams at the Your Families have been holding something called a local solutions group that's been going through all the cases. Where it needs to step up, it will go towards the stronger families in some cases, but they're working very closely aligned, so they're involved in that. And it's about trying to deal with it as quickly as possible. Stronger communities, they've got quite a wide remit, and there's only so much they can do. So it's about complementing that offer, but I'll let Rihanna come in on that.
So by providing early help, we see and solves those issues within an hour. So it's about signposting, it's about helping people access benefits, it's about helping people access different areas, supporting them through their housing issues, debt, doing some debt training and things. So it's a quick intervention at the point of contact. In terms of the stronger families, or gone blank now, the team that you refer to, that team operates within the system on a longer term. They're longer involved with families, and it's directly linked at longer term outcomes to be achieved. So this is even trying to prevent, people that are just a little bit struggling, helping them to access the right provisions at the right time.
Sorry, I'm in danger of making a statement here. My heart sank a bit when you said signposting. Sorry.
It's hand-holding, supporting families to access. Sorry.
Great. Thank you very much for that. I think we've got some questions from Councillor Needham next.
Hi, thank you. A couple of questions, and it's about SEND, but it's also about post-16. So first question is, what are we doing to connect young people who have the greatest need into post-16 opportunities?
Thank you for that. So I'll start with our care leavers at the moment, if we're talking about some of our young people that have the greatest need. Oh God, I'm going to get these confused throughout. Apologies. Greatest need. So at the moment in Doncaster, we've got more care leavers in higher education at this current time than we've ever had. So that's 62 young people accessing that. So that's a good marker of where we're at the moment. In respect of the offer, all our young people that are care leavers do have access to a careers advisor. They also have close working relationships with a virtual school as well. So this is ensuring that care leavers can access support for training and education opportunities, and access resources that they might need to support them getting into that training or employment. So that could be purchasing of IT equipment or specialist vocational equipment that they might need as well. And we're also in the process of undertaking, as an example, a number of taster days to support young people accessing jobs in the hospitality industry as well. And then just to touch upon your point regarding SEND, So all young people with an education, health and care plan, they have an annual review in the autumn or spring term in year 11. So the planning for that year 12 and 13, that begins at the latest in year 9, and then the young person's aspirations will have been as part of and obviously integral to their EHCP. So in the last stage of their school annual review, final plans are made for the next stage of their educational journey. So when the settings are identified, the young person and the parents visit to make sure that they think the college or the placement is suitable to meet their needs. At this point, we then have a discussion, the teams have a discussion around independent travel training, whether they need that. And the young person begins the preparation for transition into post-16. So all placements out of authority colleges or additional funding requests are then agreed at the SEND Quality Assurance Panel. So the panel then takes into account the journey of the young person, their voice, what they're saying about it, and the suitability of the placement or the support that's being requested. And the panel also agrees placements which they're assured that the young person can achieve the targets that they want to and prepare them for future employment, training or community-based placements. So we've got some other developments. We've also got the Doncaster Learning Ecosystem. So that's all around bringing the world of businesses and education closer together, as well as supporting a diverse and inclusive Doncaster-wide learning community approach that caters to individual needs of all residents and encourages that continual engagement. As part of our education and skills strategy, we've also developed a new skills service area to create capacity and leadership to deliver our vision for that inclusive learning ecosystem. And there's quite a lot of areas where it all sort of like connects, so we're trying to progress that and better connect the teams that are working with them vulnerable young people as well. We've got the Doncaster Skills Profile, again an aspect of the education and skills strategy. So we're trying to shape the way that we're looking at assessments. We're trying to rethink that assessment across Doncaster. So it's about enabling learners of all ages to be able to recognise and to be able to showcase their skills. So we're trying to develop the digital solution that meets the needs of all learners to support their pathways into further learning and work. And there's also, you might have heard of it, funding specifically for maths learning in an informal basis called Multiply. So we're also linking in with that because we oversee the commissioning of that and its contract with Autism Plus to provide additional expertise and engagement around ensuring that profile does work for everybody. We also, last year, no, not last year, we're still in December. This year, Remake Learning, we hosted that. That was all about being accessible and inclusive for anybody of any age with any need to be able to have that informing learning opportunity on the doorstep and something that they would never normally be able to access. So that was engaging around 10,000 people. There were 226 events with more than 80 hosts. So that's something that we're going to continue doing because we really want that informal learning to be accessible for everybody. We are also in the process of drawing together a number of both pre-existing and planned activities under something called the Inclusion Charter. So that's going to set out Team Doncaster's commitment to placing equity and inclusivity at the heart of its education and employment offer. We want a clear set of commitments from educators, employers and wider services which provide opportunities for our residents. And we've also got different examples such as our career service that we're running across Doncaster. We're working with the Chamber to deliver on their Doncaster Promise, which is creating an employer forum to bring people together as well. And we're also pulling together SEND training for each of the providers to be more inclusive as an employer as well. We've got the Doncaster's Career Hub, which is funded by the Careers Enterprise Company, that's via SIMCA, which works with 10 SEND schools and colleges in Doncaster. And as part of the mainstream schools and colleges, they also work together as well. We've also got a particular focus on pathways into employment, so supported internships. So building on what we're trying to do, as I've just mentioned, We've recently appointed a special educational needs and disabilities enterprise coordinator, and they started just at the back end of November. So they're working alongside the enterprise to share best practice around employability and skills, building linkages with local employers, to provide opportunities for adults as well. And they're also trying to help get supported internships in place. So they've been working on quite a lot recently. So, for example, I mean, they've only been in post a few weeks, but they've been meeting with all post-16 SEN providers. They've been meeting with Barnsley Local Authority to look at their offer, to see if we can replicate some of their really good practice they've got in place. Our internal HR at the local authority, we're looking at writing supported internships frameworks. So as a local authority, we can offer that as well. There's also a meeting in January. Dave's not here anymore, but to see what St Ledger can do to get on board with this. And we're also in a forum called Employment is for Everybody. So we're leading that work at a South Yorkshire level as well. And there's network events that take place monthly that we're all involved in. We've updated and we're trying to implement that supported internship action plan and make sure it's aligned with our SEND strategy as well, and updating our local offer to residents. So there is a lot of work that's going off in the system at the moment, and we're just trying to integrate these services and make sure that we can develop that enhanced offer in place. But I'll stop there because I've gone on quite a bit.
Thank you. That's quite a good response. I do have supplementary questions, but they're more like quick fire ones. So my initial thoughts on what you've said is brilliant. In terms of shaping provision, I'd like to inquire, is the voice of the child considered, and how does that work? So how do young people shape the service that they want to use? Especially if they're looked after, is there a bursary programme? So back in olden days, we used to have VMA, didn't we? And that were quite successful for certain groups. Last question, sorry. Is there flexibility for change? Because I know sometimes you can at best career drive arse in will, but when you get there, you think, I'm not really sure. So is there a process for people to change their minds and try different things? And my last question is based on, we spoke about those with care experience and we spoke about those with SEND. What about those young people who come from a culture where there's no worklessness in the family? And then that might be from generations. So those young people are really hard sometimes to even know what they want to do in terms of work or college. So I just wondered if that had been considered as well. Sorry, that's 4 questions.
No, that's fine. And I'll just put your flexibility for change and sort of like your last question together. One thing that we really want to be clear with our education and skills strategy is around nobody knows what they want to be. And if you're not exposed to it, you don't know what you don't know. So we're really keen on them informal learning opportunities, and Remake Learning is a classic example of that. And we are really proud that we're able to do that in Doncaster and have it internationally recognised as well. But we want young people to be able to have them taster days and see if it is for them. And even adults as well at any age to be able to pop into a sewing class and think, oh, actually I'm quite good at this, or maybe not so, or have exposure to careers that they never would have realised. I think an area that we do really need to focus on is during that school and building up that exposure. So there's some schools that do really, really well in terms of exposing young people to opportunities at university or apprenticeships or anything like, stuff like that. And there's some that maybe they'll do an overview, but maybe not dig down onto it and get that pathway. So we want that flexibility because we know people change their minds. I mean, I wanted to be a teacher, but that didn't happen. So you've got to be able to change your mind and have a taster into something and see how things work. So Remake Learning and some of the work experience stuff is central to that. And again, that exposure. So through our youth unemployment hubs that we hold and some of our support for our adult learners, it's being able to say, well, what do you fancy? You could do X, Y, and Z, and providing that specialist and niche pathway plan for them. And then just in terms of the voice of the child, absolutely, that has to be central to what we do. So as we'd mentioned before, in terms of developing their own pathway, their voice would be captured on that EHCP. They would be visiting the school and they would make sure that is captured throughout the journey so we weren't losing sight. If that's answered it all right for you.
I meant in terms of shaping provision, but yeah, and I get that. And not everybody has an EHCP either, so yeah.
So we've got a really active youth council and some young advisors that are representing the voice of children and young people. In general, some of the youth council, you will know the youth council leads lots of campaigns about stuff. Those youth councillors also, the youth and young advisors and youth councillors and people from our Children and Care Council attend some of our interviews. We've got young commissioners that help shape services. So they are part of our contracting arrangements. When we design new services, we bring those young people in to help us design some of our provisions. Those are some of the examples as to how we use voice of children and young people. Can we do more? Obviously, we can continue to do more every day, Councillor Needham.
Just one supplementary question. I'm just wondering about NEETs. You talked about the extra programmes that you put in place for those children who have, or young people who have EHCs. I wonder if we know how many of the NEETs are in that tier below EHCs and have additional SEND needs, but just below the EHC, and particularly if we're looking at reducing the EHCs, what programmes are in place to support these young people into post-16 and not to become NEETs?
Yes, so our needs team, again, each young person has an advisor. They're regularly in contact with people that are either at risk, so there's that preventative model, and also those that are in need. So they'll get text messages, emails, phone calls, and the team will have regular contact with them and try and find out. When I'd mentioned around the youth unemployment hub that we have, so they'll make referrals through there and they get their own job coaches, or they'll be able to steer them into pathway into education. So they do have quite a strong grip on that. They're quite relentless, I'm sure. I've seen one example of where they were sending 4 or 5 letters to try and make sure that they were in contact with that young person. So I think obviously throughout school you will try and capture that need, and just as that preventative model, the team will pick that up. But they do have that pathway that's developed for them.
Thank you very much. Councillor Needham, I think you've got another question, is that right? Or you think it's been covered? Yeah. Oh.
I'll say it anyway, just in case there's any additional information, but we have spoken about it quite a lot. So the question is, given the pressure on placements and funding for SEND, what are your plans to enable more young people to access education in Doncaster?
Yeah, I mean, so we can just do a bit of a recap on some of the capital projects that we've been working on. So we've been able to do quite a lot of capital investment on increasing places across Doncaster. So we've got a refurbishment at Hillside, what was Hillside Academy. That's going to support increased volume of places. So when we're talking about those young people that might not meet the threshold for an EHCP, might not require alternative provision, but there could be some SEMH needs as well, being able to capture them young people, integrate them eventually into mainstream. We've got post-16 provision that's being built at Stonehill. I think that is, let me just double check that. That's 36 new places for post-16. And then we've got 24 places at Coppice School as well. So that's the capital stuff that we've been working on. We've also been increasing capacity at mainstream sites for SEN and also SEMH. So we've been working with all stakeholders and multi-agency partners and children and young people and the parents as well. And that's around our equitable and inclusive education. So it was a report that had come through a few weeks ago. We've also been working on a local handbook and toolkit for practitioners, so ensuring we've got that more consistent approach across Doncaster in terms of identification or assessment and in terms of intervention as well. As we'd mentioned, we were talking about that new funding model, again, allow that consistency to be built in. And when we're talking about the schools and the placements that have been built, we've also got 40 new specialist placements for children with social, emotional and mental health needs as well. And that's within 4 mainstream schools, so trying to keep our children and young people in Doncaster and in their own settings as much as possible. And then when we're talking about the post-16 stuff, we were working around the employability plan and the employers forum that has been set, and we've been working for dedicated posts within the council that are able to assist with that.
That's okay, Councillor Needham? Okay, thank you very much for attending, and you're welcome to stay, but if you need to leave, please leave. Thank you. We're moving on to developing skills to live and to thrive in life and work even. We are looking at priority questions, but in actual fact, if you don't mind, Councillor Needham, we have touched on educational health and social care plans in the past, and we will make sure it gets asked next time. I just wanted to move on to Councillor Cobby's question. That's okay.
Okay, thank you. I was just looking at the information about the children missing in education, so it's just kind of been interesting to know a little bit about the background information, because there's still a lot of children still missing in education. Just wondering, is there any particular, is Council aware of any barriers, like could be such as like language skills as a reason why children are not being able to receive education? And also, is the team, if the team are aware of these issues, what are they doing to overcome these barriers?
Thank you, Councillor Kobe. That's really helpful. So children missing in education are reported to the council by schools when a child or a young person leaves and their destination is unknown in terms of a school registration. In some instances, the young person is not missing for very long because people are just moving and finding a new school placement, and as soon as we get that information back, we close that case. Sometimes the family is living in a home, avoiding contact, rather than sending the child to school. So an education welfare officer picks that up usually, and it's dealt with as a non-attendance issue. Where a child has moved borough, checks are done and made sure that it's picked up in the next borough, and that they are allocated a school place as soon as possible. Excuse me. When families arrive in Doncaster, there are a number of services and charities to support them immediately to ensure that the young person is allocated a school place. So, for example, we saw it with the Ukrainian children that came to our borough. It's about accessing and allocating a school place as soon as possible. We also work closely with the Refugee Council to actively seek workers from the refugee community. Where parents do not use English as a first language, we provide interpretation for the school to make sure that they can speak to parents in their home language. The virtual school language support service has got 50 officers who that helps with interpretation within school. So that's kind of the things that we do to overcome the barriers. And we have got a really robust tracking system for tracking children that are missing in education.
Thank you very much for that. We'll move on to nurturing a child and family-friendly borough. And the priority question we've got is from Antoinette. Thank you.
You've talked about the 40 places that we've created in schools to keep children in borough, but obviously the cost of each placement out of borough is increasing over time. So what is it that we're doing to ensure that we kind of future-proof the costs, because the savings are being eaten up by the increased costs of fewer placements?
So multiple facets to that. Some of that I've already answered in other questions we've covered, but I think the important point is that if we apply the graduated approach within schools and within the system, then we will support children for longer in mainstream schools with the necessary support around them in schools. So we will then reduce the through flow in terms of special educational placements. I've talked a little bit then as children's needs become more complex, they kind of move on into the graduated further up in the process. What we do know is currently that we don't have enough special school placements, and that's what's driving the out of authority placements, and that we don't have enough targeted provision, or that some of that targeted provision is in the wrong place. So that's why we have created the 40 places social, emotional, mental health placements that are 10 each in 4 localities attached to specific schools to build the capacity, the targeted capacity. We're also investing further in our alternative provision element of that, and you will recall I've spoken often about our big picture and the Vega College provision, which is really targeted, personalised education to help children go back into mainstream school. And the Vega College is actually a really innovative way of helping children accessing employment and training in that key stage 4 range. And we've had real success. We've had 40 children going through that provision, and all of those have got destinations at the end of it. And these are children that were completely disengaged from education and would have ended up with no prospects going on. So we want to expand those provisions further. So those are two of the examples that we are doing. In terms of the driving the cost down of external placements, because we don't have enough special school placements, we have to go externally. We are now at a place where it's quite significant, where we don't even have enough places in independent schools for our children. So that drives a lot of our tribunals and a lot of our challenge around our EHCPs, because we can't provide the place that's named within the EHCP. In terms of driving the cost down, we've got a quality assurance panel that meets regularly, and you would have heard of that before earlier on. That quality assures the placements, making sure that that placement is the correct placement for a young person, and that their educational pathway and the golden thread can be seen, and that there's positive outcomes for those children. We can't do anything about prices going up. And we see it in the social care sector and in the independent education sector, that prices has dramatically increased 30 to 40% as to what it was before. What we do know, though, is how we manage some of that is through the quality assurance process that we have in place. So on an individual basis, we evaluate or we monitor the quality of the individual educational placement for a young person, but we also then overall quality assure the provider as such. So we will go into our alternative provision providers to check the quality. And most recently, we identified some weakness in some of the providers, and we withdrew our children from that provision because it wasn't good quality and definitely not best value. So we're trying to manage the market in that way, but in an increasing, bursting demand where more people want more specialist provisions and more children needing that, we don't necessarily have the capacity in the system to deal with it, and therefore that drives the prices. Because unfortunately some of our providers know that we are desperate.
So as a long-term strategy, are Doncaster considering increasing the number of very specialist places that they can provide for themselves, either attached to a mainstream or separately?
So what is very difficult is, for example, we know that there is an argument for having more special schools on the patch. The local authority can't apply to build a special school. We can only apply in partnership with a multi-academy trust to access grant funding, and that only comes around ever so often through the free school grant. So you will know our Barder school that we partnered with Nexus, and that was in the previous free school round where we accessed that, and that created a 100-place provision for children with high-level communication needs. So, but they are like hen teeths, those provisions. So the thing that we need to focus on is having tailored, personalised packages of care or support in schools for children, and that's what we're trying to build the capacity within our own systems to deal and support to support young people as long as possible within mainstream school.
Councillor Cox, I don't know if that touched on your question about future-proofing. Did you want to ask your question?
Thank you. What are we doing to provide education in terms of providing new schools? And I think you have just touched on that. But, I mean, we know that, and I spoke before this meeting to Tim about different school provision and sites that have been highlighted through different agreements. With what you've just said, would it not be worth, and same as Antoinette said, would it not be worth looking at providing a mainstream school that academies could fund with a section of it that would be for additional needs? And then it's ticking all boxes. And the land's there. I'm sure the academies would work with the council, and surely it's a no-brainer. Would that be something to look at?
That's exactly what we're doing. So the social emotional mental hub provisions are exactly that, attached to mainstream schools, providing additional support. And then there's other provisions. So in some schools, in some primary schools, you will have a nurture provision that's specifically with children for additional needs to help and support them, which is smaller classrooms, smaller groups of children being supported. So it is building that capacity within schools. That's exactly what we're trying to do, Councillor Cox. Just to pick up, do you want me to pick up a little bit about funding and some of the things that we're doing in general and how we could access that?
Yeah, if it's all right, Chair. Yeah, you could do, but I'm quite concerned about future-proofing and providing schools moving forward. We know the spaces are going to we're going to have less and less and less as development takes place. So we know that, it's a fact. What are we doing to create those places moving forward, as in new schools?
So we have got a statutory duty to ensure that there's sufficient places for children within the borough, and we do that projections on census data, and you will have seen many of those things. So we've got the funding streams to enable us to create more spaces. The generic one is the DFE Basic Needs Grant, and that's provided by the DFE based upon the need of mainstream places. This is allocated annually based on the annual return that we do in terms of demand for places in planning areas. The grant funds the majority of mainstream projects and places. Doncaster was not assessed as requiring any additional basic need funding because they look at all of the placements across the city, whether we've got enough of them, and at the minute they're saying we do. So we're not getting any mainstream DFE funding to provide any further places. Housing developers, section 106, you'll all be very familiar with that. That's subject to a needs assessment on each planning application and approval of the necessary admission by the council and the developer. And that only happens after the housing estate's been built, and there's again an assessment around whether there's sufficient places within the place. These sums can only be included in the amounts specifically to the housing when that's been done. The DFE SEND funding, so when we get now into more specialist stuff, the DFE SEND funding, that's provided for specific expansions of SEND provisions. And so I've talked a little bit about that. So SEMH hubs is funded through that particular fund. There's also the expansion of post-16 provision at Stonehill Special Schools, that's funding that. And then the thing that I've mentioned before about the DFE free school bidding. So that's ad hoc bidding opportunities that comes around for new provision in the area. This has most recently seen our Nexus development through the Barder School, but that's very ad hoc as and when that comes out. I can give you a list, but it's quite a long list. I can give you a list about where we're doing expansions in terms of mainstream schools and all of that. But I think I've covered the main bits around where our capital expansion is and how we're dealing with that.
We can always talk in this area for a long time with being so complex and so important. Maybe it's something for me to the Children and Young People's panel, but my sort of thought was, how do we make sure that that provision, that special support provision, actually goes to the children who need it within the budgets that the schools have? Maybe if you can answer that quickly. But
that's through assessed need. So children will only access that provision if the needs has been assessed.
Yeah, but just to make sure the money is spent. Yeah, thank you. We'll move on to promoting the borough, its cultural, sporting and heritage opportunities. And we've got a question from Councillor Cobby.
Hi, yes. I reading the section on the promoting the borough and its cultural, sporting and heritage, and noticed it was only a small section. So it'd be good to know what is the council doing to celebrate the rich and diverse cultural heritage of residents living in Doncaster to create a sense of belonging and community cohesion. I know we heard a little bit earlier about Rachel Blake's Choose Kindness, but I would like to know a bit more as well. What else there is?
Yeah, Councillor Blake did mention Choose Kindness, and the session at Cosworth was very inclusive and celebratory, so I think that's a good starting point. Also, Windrush 75 was a really powerful celebratory event, took place 22nd of June, and recognising the huge contribution of people from the Caribbean that have gone on to work in Doncaster in the newly formed NHS at the time, and local industry, coal mining, etc. other places too. And in terms of setting that up, we work with Doncaster community groups. So Heritage Doncaster work with Second Generation, BLM Doncaster, BME United, and the Inclusion and Fairness Forum. So a kind of a sense as well of that sort of infrastructure being in place to help us celebrate inclusive events. And don't forget, in terms of 2,000 years of black history in Doncaster, we've still got the exhibition in DGLAM that will be there until the 1st of January. So it's a bit of a plug for that, actually. It's worth going in to see it. Also in terms of Doncaster Pride, so again, we get kind of agency support for that, and certainly within the council, our event safety advisory group, the communities team, other Doncaster services. We've had a lot of growth in recent years, and we should be proud actually that we're going to be UK City of Pride in 2024. And there's some wider examples as well. So we've got, in terms of heritage and culture, advisory panels that are explicitly, deliberately inclusive. So for example, the Right Up Our Street advisory panel that brings kind of culture and heritage to local communities. The Heritage Doncaster Community Advisory Panel. We've also got an Emerging Artists Forum, which we're explicitly developing on the lines of the Bradford Culture Forum model. Bradford about to be UK City of Culture, championing inclusion and diversity. We picked up Her Story, the kind of walk through time kind of piece of work that championed women from different communities in Doncaster who've lived extraordinary lives. We've also got really strong partners who we co-fund. So, for example, CAST ensure that there's British Sign Language alongside all their theatre productions. And in terms of its charitable aims, there's also a theatre of sanctuary. So people seeking asylum have had the chance to take part in theatre performances and events. And CAST has worked with sanctuary seekers through their Script Works programme, so supporting local artists to develop their written work and their performance skills. Similarly with DARTS, the Doncaster Community Arts kind of organisation that are again another kind of, I'm forgetting the word I'm looking for here, but a kind of a foundational part of our kind of culture, kind of infrastructure in Doncaster. So a wide range of creative activities, inclusivity at the centre, including the only Makaton-friendly venue in Doncaster. And then other things, got a bit of a list. So autism social groups for children and their parents at DGLAM, Black History Month, which we celebrate each year, and again has a lot of focus. The Culture Education Partnership, developing diverse cultural and artistic programming across the city. Remake Learning as an inclusive event, working with Doncaster Chamber and PAB Languages. So I probably should stop going on. This isn't me saying that we do everything great, by the way, but it is because there's loads and loads of room for development and loads of communities in Doncaster that we need to get more alongside. But it's more a sense that we have got a developing track record in terms of our culture and heritage offer of making sure that is inclusive. And we're lucky to have organisations alongside us that share those aims.
Thanks, Phil. I think it's like, for me, it's being able to share this information. I know we talked about this financial quarter, but there's a lot of stuff that's gone in last quarter, which we touched on, including like Black History Month and all the others, like things that are going with the artists as well. When we read the reports, it's just 2 paragraphs where what are we doing to like really capture what is going on in Doncaster and how we share that across our communities. Because I think it is sometimes lost that we are not really touching on the cultural and sporting and heritage opportunities as well. Like I mentioned, I'll just touch on the reserve question. We've, the Don's chief success this year being promoted to the championship in the rugby league. So again, how we're promoting that, supporting our local teams as well. We need to really push that. Whether obviously we're talking about financial pots, but how we're not, even if it's not financial, how we're supporting our local community.
Yeah, so I think there's a wider question about just general communications from the council amplifying great Doncaster achievements. But I think in terms of the culture side of things, culture and heritage side of things, we've got a culture strategy. I think what we've recognised is it needs to speak a little bit louder and a little bit more accessibly about the things that we are doing and the things that Doncaster people are doing across a range of diverse backgrounds. So yeah, we'd agree that in terms of the culture strategy, we're not shouting enough or publicising enough or connecting enough with the different things that are happening.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Steve, I'm moving on too fast.
Thanks for that. I mean, I attended a ball on Saturday night with Windrush, with second generation Windrush, talking to some, and it were in Bentley at Pavilion, absolutely bang on. There must have been, I don't know, 200 people there. And I was talking to organisers there, and they were struggling with funding. And everything that they've done themselves, which is phenomenal. And I mentioned in there that potentially through officers, through ward members, they may be able to either apply for or get some kind of funding from whichever ward member it is. And also, I asked if they'd had any connection with Doncaster through their groups for funding. And they had no idea. But we're talking about a vast amount of people within there that have done it all themselves, and there's been no connectivity between those people and the Doncaster or any financial support from there, and for the very groups that Gemma's talking about. So what can we do to improve that connectivity?
Do you want me to answer that one about Doncaster? I think it's continuing to promote the work that the team do and the availability of grants and other types of financial support. There is quite a lot, but we need to get better at articulating what it is and doing it in a more rounded way, rather than there's this grant, there's that grant, the other grant. Well, actually, here's one place where you can find all the different types of support that's available. And one of the other things that I know Vanessa and team are doing, which we want to progress through 24, is making more visible where funding has already been allocated, and have a kind of web tool, something on the website which you could look at, and you could say, by ward, this is the kind of, or by locality, these are the grants that have been given to which groups and for which purpose over which period of time. That'll also help to promote where we've got gaps and where we've got areas we might want to focus and target on. So definitely a work in progress, and definitely more to do in terms of promoting. Sorry.
I mean, that's brilliant, and thank you. But I thought part of the Doncaster and the communities and the groups that are actually got their feet on the floor is to engage with these groups that are there. If that group hasn't been engaged with, surely there's a question of what are we actually doing?
Yeah, I mean, we could get into there's probably a lot we could talk through, but Doncaster do engage with a whole range of different groups, and I was at one of their meetings the other week, and the richness and diversity of the groups they are supporting across the whole of the city in a whole range of different ways. I was really taken aback by how much they're doing and how deep that is. But obviously there are always going to be some groups where there's maybe not that connection, and we need to do more to reach further. And I think that's where the connectivity through Doncaster, for example, and the ward members, the lead locality groups, and other different mechanisms we've got just to promote that availability. And if we can back that up with more information on the web and more clarity about where we've got resources that are currently targeted, I think that'll help. It can hopefully only improve over time. So thanks for the question, Steve.
Thank you very much for that. We're moving on to building opportunities for healthier, happier and longer lives for all. Excuse me. And we're looking at a prior question from Councillor Smith.
So what's been done to improve the numbers of mothers who are stopping smoking in Doncaster?
Well, I'll pick this one up if that's okay. So I suppose just a bit of context first. So we've got around 12% of women are still smoking at the time of their birth in Doncaster at the moment, which is obviously still quite a concerning and high number. And as we know, it's linked to poor outcomes in a whole range of different ways. You don't need me to tell you that. And also that kind of idea that it's an addiction, not a lifestyle choice as well. So once started, we need to treat it as an addiction. So I suppose just by way of context, in terms of what we've got in place already, we have a smoking in pregnancy service that's currently run by RDASH, and anyone who is pregnant and declares that they're a smoker and pregnant can access that service, and they can access it until their child is one. And obviously we have other smoking cessation services beyond that. So that service is in place, and it supports dads as well. So it's not just mums, it's mums and dads. And we're also looking at re-tendering that as well at the moment. So that's currently out to tender and will be the refresh service, which will build on the learning from what we've had from the current contract, will be in place in 2024. And the idea is that we want to make that as much more focus on early engagement, including in preconception, to make sure that advice and support is available as early as possible through pregnancy. There's also some extra resources that we've got coming into Doncaster as well that will further support our work in this area. So I'm probably aware that the Prime Minister announced some new legislation that would in effect make smoking illegal, because the age of consent, the age of legal smoking is going to increase every year as well. So in effect it will become illegal for those over 14 now to have a smoke. And we're going to be getting a 5-year funding settlement. I think it's in the region of about £500,000 a year to support efforts to stop smoking across the city. So that will further boost the newly tendered service that we have, which will be in place from 2024. So that's okay. That's the current overview of what we've got and what's coming next.
We have struggled a bit with this target, haven't we? I mean, what do you think has actually not worked? What might work in the future?
So I think there's a number of things. So we've had relatively small numbers of people engaging with the current service. So there's something around how do we make that much more visible and much more integrated with other advice and support that pregnant women are getting. And at that point I made earlier about that being as early as possible. And also preconception stage as well, so people understand the dangers of smoking. I think there's more that we can do in terms of integrating it with other advice and support that we have in communities and localities. So we just heard earlier from Lanny about the kind of think families approach. So how can we make sure that more of that advice is kind of in communities and integrated with other support that we have. We're also doing some work to learn from other local authorities, particularly in the sub-region. So there's been some work with Barnsley and Rotherham and Sheffield as well, so we can, again, if something's working in one place or one context, how can we learn from that and then apply it to Doncaster? Obviously the context is always going to be slightly different, but there's learning that we can do and more work that we can do to take that learning and apply it as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. Just a final question. When do you think that it will start improving?
I would say once we've got the new service backed by additional resources, so through 24, we should start to see some improvement, because it's not just what we do as well, just through the smoking, the support service that we have, but it's some of that broader messaging that young people are getting as well, the broader messaging around smoking not being a good thing. And I think the legislation that's being brought forward from the government will also help that. So because we're operating in a context, not a vacuum, aren't we? So the more that environment becomes more anti-smoking, the better.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that's actually been said is the sea change in how we look at it. I think it's really important that it's seen as an addiction and absolutely not anything to do with a lifestyle choice, and that people need that support. And with the extra funding, hopefully we'll see some downturn in figures, particularly amongst young mums and dads.
Thank you. Just checking. Move on to section 7, creating safer, stronger, greener and cleaner communities where everyone belongs. Just making sure it's on. So, a question from myself. High-risk referrals to the Domestic Abuse Hub are flagged. What is being done to address this?
So if someone's at high risk, which means they're felt to be at risk of serious harm or even death, they're referred to the Multi-Agency Risk Assessment Conference, with the kind of acronym is MARAC. They might be risk assessed by a partner agency, or they might come through the Domestic Abuse hub itself. Then they'll get their situation assessed pretty quickly, and they'll be allocated an independent domestic violence advocate who's there to support them and be their voice at the MARAC meeting. They'll be contacted by the independent domestic violence advocate. Sometimes we call those an IDVA. Within 48 hours of the referral being received, and they'll remain their support worker to liaise with agencies and provide practical and emotional support. If there's a repeat incident of domestic abuse after the MARAC, often the person will be referred back. That can be positive as well as negative in terms of a repeat, because having support from agencies can often encourage people to report abuse, including historic abuse, whereas if they don't perceive anything's going to happen, then they're less likely to report it in the first place. Where the abuse continues, we've got eyes on the family, and we work together in a multi-agency way to end the abuse. And all agencies who are represented at the MARAC will have flags on their own systems to identify the person as being at high risk of serious harm or death and subject to a MARAC. So that means that they can gear their own individual responses accordingly. Our overall domestic abuse strategy focuses on early intervention and early identification as well, and kind of a coordinated community response to prevent and tackle domestic abuse. So the whole point is to try and prevent people becoming high risk in the first place. So we've got some success stories in our last 2 annual reports and what we've set out in our domestic abuse strategy in terms of the way we're achieving that. So I think it's a difficult balance, and there's a judgment call about how many people going through MARAC is a good thing. A high number, what maybe the awareness is there and we're intervening. You know, that's one interpretation, and also in terms of repeat offenders. But overall, our main approach is to try and make sure that we've got a zero tolerance approach to domestic abuse wherever it occurs, and we're trying to reduce the likelihood of individual Doncaster people having to go through that MARAC process.
I know that it's a very complex approach that we've got to tackling it, and it's been gone through various forms of scrutiny. Just looking for Councillor Cobby in various ways. I was just sort of flagging up that the fact that it is flagged, that there are more repeats going to MARAC at the moment. Is it something that is what is flagged? Is that right? Am I understanding it right?
Yeah, so we have a kind of a performance indicator around repeats. It's worth as well. The other balance is we've tried to be discerning about the number of repeat referrals that do go to MARAC. And every council in the country has got this sort of issue where the balance between what's discussed at MARAC and how long that takes and how useful that is for the person. So we've done some work to try and reduce the number of repeat referrals that are discussed at MARAC, where we don't think that necessarily will add value to that person and their risks. So it's something we keep an eye on, but I think there's always going to be a level of discussion required about getting the balance right. And just to be clear, our process in Doncaster is pretty much a national process in relation to that kind of MARAC approach. So it's not a process that we've invented. It's a kind of a robust multi-agency approach to making sure that where there is a serious risk of harm or even death, that we do something quickly as a partnership to address that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll move section 9, because I know you want to leave reasonably early, Phil. Making Doncaster the best place to do business and create good jobs. So we've got a question from Glynis, Councillor Smith.
So when can we expect to see an improvement to the number of people with a learning disability in employment, particularly as we are now signed up to the Disability Employment Charter?
So I'd expect to see an improvement as we go through the 2024-25 financial year. I think previously when we've discussed this performance, it's felt to me a bit bitty. So it's felt like I've been able to talk about what's been happening in my directorate, but maybe we haven't had a joined up way of describing what's happening across a number of directorates to make this happen. That's now changed. so I can provide a bit more of a joined up picture. So within adults wellbeing and culture, we're kind of building on our job coach model. We've talked about that at some other meetings, other scrutinies. So we've got some good success stories of bringing people through, not just into any job, but into good jobs for them. So listening to them about their motivations and things that, you know, like the rest of us, we want to work where we want to work, don't we? We don't want to be bumped into a job just because we've got to, you know, it's the only thing that we're being offered. So we've got some good examples coming through there. Our Children and Young People's Directorate leads on employment and skills, and they've recently appointed a Special Educational Needs and Disability Enterprise Coordinator. So they started at the back end of November. They've put together an employability plan so that we've got more of a grip around our pathways into employment. And part of the work we're doing is putting together a supported internship framework so that we can start to offer those and provide a bit more support to people that need that to establish themselves in work. We've committed to 28 people with a learning disability obtaining and securing paid employment over a 2-year period is within that local supported employment programme. And we've also set up a dedicated employer forum, so Team Doncaster colleagues to support people with a special educational need or disability or a learning disability to access and maintain employment. And then in terms of our kind of inward-looking council work, I think it's helpful that you've kind of made the comment about the Disability Employment Charter. So what are we doing as a big employer and ourselves to kind of improve kind of this statistic? So we've got some green shoots, I think. So, for example, we've had a 27% increase in employees who felt confident enough to say, yes, I have a learning disability. So it's still a small number. So still only about 1% of our overall workforce identifies as having a learning disability, but quite a big kind of trajectory, which is about, I think it's about people feeling safe to do that, to be honest, where they feel like if they do that, they'll get supported rather than they feel that there's any stigma around it. I think that's a promising shift. But I think our core job is to help more people with learning disability and more autistic people come to work for the council, because we know the huge contribution they make in Doncaster life, and they can make that contribution in the council as well. So we're already an accredited disability confident employer. So all our advertised roles explain that disabled applicants have a guaranteed interview if they meet the minimum criteria for the vacancy. But on top of that, we're reviewing our end-to-end recruitment process in the council, questioning the skills and qualifications that we've specified that people need to have, making sure it's clearer about how people can apply and the advice and guidance that they receive and the language that we use in our ads, which sometimes isn't particularly accessible. And we're also in the process of signing up to the South Yorkshire employment is for everyone, ambassador standards. So that will help us connect with support organisations and training to support us to get more of a grip on employing people with a learning disability or autistic people. In terms of people that are in work, we already work with Access to Work to support their health needs and their access to equipment and services, help them get into work and stay at work, so access to job coaching, specialist equipment, assistive software, and using reasonable adjustments through kind of well at work statements and linking to reasonable adjustment guidance. So changes to the job aids and equipment, changes to procedures, flexibilities. And we're looking at our flexible working policy overall, looking at the idea of flexible working being an entitlement from day one of employment, looking at the ability to make 2 flexible working change requests per year. So it feels to me overall that our policy context as a council is good. We've got a range of different things that feel like they are overtly friendly to people with disabilities working for us. I think the challenge more is so that our managers understand and implement that framework to its fullest extent. So we know that council staff have to undertake a mandatory course on equality in the workplace, which includes disability awareness. But we think we need to do more work around staff development and management development that supports conscious inclusion, reduces bias and encourages people to be more kind of action focused when it comes to inclusivity, because just having the framework isn't enough. You have to be very positive about the way you engage with it, and an understanding of the barriers that people with disabilities face and the stigmas you're trying to overcome. So part of that as well is linking in with our kind of be kind approach and having employee networks for colleagues who would self-identify as having a disability, a learning disability, or who are autistic. So it feels like that, you know, short answer to your question as I provided at the start is we'd expect numbers to improve next year, but there's work for us to do to build on this strong policy framework and this strong work in between directorates now so that it does to its fullest extent.
I mean, I'm conscious that in the past, people who would have accessed employment have felt that they wouldn't necessarily benefit because of a loss of some allowance that they kind of rely on. So is that being looked at the same time? Because I am conscious there are some individuals who do huge amounts of voluntary work, which is very important and meaningful. And the other thing that I became conscious of fairly recently was a gentleman with autism who had a first-class degree and a master's, but was autistic, and he felt that his level of employment was always below his skills, and that he didn't have the same opportunities as other people, or that was how he saw it. So I suppose it's those things that need to be addressed.
Yeah, I think those are two distinct things. So I think that the fact that the environment for people in relation to benefits receipt and different disincentives, especially when you're trying to maintain some kind of a level of balance and you're looking for some kind of part-time employment, I think that's a national issue. And I think so people have to make difficult choices in those sorts of positions. I think what we can do and should do as a council and as a place is offer good employment opportunities to people that mean that for a number of people, for example, the autistic person you mentioned earlier, just now, it's about having an autism-friendly approach. I mean, he sounds like a huge asset, and it's ludicrous, isn't it, if he's kind of underpowered in what he's doing compared to what he could actually do. So some of that will be about an autism-friendly environment in terms of, like I've already set out, really, in the way we write applications, in the way that we assess people. We're fairly, the standard recruitment process isn't very autism-friendly for most employers. It puts people through an ordeal that actually doesn't necessarily assess whether they'd be good at the job anyway, and can be especially difficult for some autistic people. So it's that sort of consideration that we need to build in to our work. So the nuts and bolts of it, it's not just policies look good, but the nuts and bolts of what we do supports the best people, actually. Autistic people can be the absolute best people, supports them to get into to work and make a huge contribution.
Brilliant. I'm living in Ocean Staff Networks. I'm part of a staff network for local authority where I work. That's based on protected characteristics, though, so it crosses a whole range. And then in terms of hidden disabilities and neurodiversity specifically, it's not just about autism.
No.
So, and I know that's a word that people talk about all the time, but as an ADHD person, then I have all sorts of similar kind of things, and so I think we need to look at hidden disabilities across. So there's 7 aspects of neurodiversity, and that's only one of them. So, but yeah, absolutely, the spirit of it is fantastic. So thank you for that.
Can I just come in very briefly, just to reassure Councillor Needham on that? Yeah, you're right. The National Performance Indicator is just about learning disability. But in relation to the local account for adult social care that hopefully Cabinet will sign off in January, we've talked about, we've been deliberately very general in the way that we commit to supporting people into employment, so we've not specified particular diagnoses or conditions.
Thank you very much. We will finish by past, by the way. move on to section 8, building transport and digital connections fit for the future. And I've got a question, which I to some extent held over from last time. What can you tell us about the Superfast South Yorkshire programme and Project Gigabyte? How and when will Doncaster benefit?
Thank you, Chair. So if I just talk about what do I know about the programme. So it's a South Yorkshire programme, and it's overseen by the Mayoral Combined Authority, and it's about digital connectivity and accessibility, which is actually integral from my directorate to growth and development. Now, in terms of the actual strategy, there are actually a number of priorities and targets within it. You have to excuse me because I'm actually struggling to read my notes. I've got a problem with contact lenses this morning, and I can only generally see out of my left eye. So, and I keep trying to adjust, but it's getting to be a bit of a I think I need reading glasses, I think, Chair. So that's going to be a trip to Specsavers at the weekend. And obviously the structure is based around a number of things, because you've got rural and urban infrastructure, and almost making digital connectivity the fourth utility. But then you've also got accessibility to that, because obviously you need to have digital literacy and actually people to have the tools to be able to access it. So basically the South Yorkshire programme, in summary, is Project Gigabit is to bring full fibre to the most rural parts of South Yorkshire. It's also to provide infrastructure to back that up, and making sure that it's accessible, and that also that some of the providers make more informed resource allocations, because what I've found in previous experience with some of the providers is that they'll stick a mast here, or they'll stick a fibre cabinet in here, but that's not actually always that useful, because there's loads of people here who could benefit from a cabinet, but actually that's not on their programme. And I've actually found when you've spoke to some of the providers, they've been quite useful, and actually appreciated the local authority and particularly elected members' intervention to understand what local need is and tailor their services a little bit more than to just, as I said earlier, a cabinet here or not, or a mast here or not. In terms of what we've been doing in South Yorkshire that impacts on the borough, there are gigabit vouchers for rural residents that they can access to help them with the cost of buying equipment. One innovative approach that they're looking at, which is in Barnsley and in Penistone in Sheffield, is called Innovation Fibre in Water, which the two don't necessarily immediately marry, do they? But what that is technically is putting the cables in with the water pipes, so that you get that connectivity. Because that is one of the problems if developers don't look at for employment or for housing about the connectivity and using fibre connectivity as the fourth utility. It comes in later, and then for all of us who are experiencing that, you have to buy a bigger box, and you can't get a signal in one room, or your broadband drops out. And that's lucky enough if you're able to afford broadband or be able to afford the system and the IT to use it. So that's a 2-year project, and I'm interested in what that does actually identify. So there's an emerging plan across South Yorkshire, but I think there are some issues really beyond the strategy about what that does for infrastructure, about accessibility, particularly for businesses and for residents. And if you want me to, I can talk a little bit more about some of our council approach to digitalisation and what we're doing, particularly for residents, but also perhaps as an organisation as well.
Just ask a question from what you just said. You said it's about full fibre to the most rural parts of the South Yorkshire mayoral region. Is this a little bit like the bus network, as in they want to provide the buses on the most profitable routes, and the providers, some of the infrastructure providers, don't necessarily want to put the connectivity where it benefits the most excluded? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognise that rural broadband and connectivity is not solely one of the challenges of digital connectivity. Because actually you can have some areas where you've got, some urban areas actually across South Yorkshire are pretty poor in terms of connectivity. So just so I'm clear, that's not the sole priority, that's one of the strands within the strategy, which I think is quite relevant for Doncaster as well because of our rurality and our connectivity. But I think the general principle is just about providing better coverage on accessibility to digital accessibility broadband right across South Yorkshire, because it's integral not only to how people live their lives and access what is now increasingly IT reliant systems, but also for businesses, because if we're going to grow some of the better sectors of employment, particularly around digital technology, and get some of those clusters where we get startups and we get some of the more entrepreneurial businesses, we need to have good quality connectivity that's reliable.
Councillor Needham, do you want to ask a question about inclusivity?
I do, Chair, thank you. In terms of the document and the papers, on page 87, it tells us that as an emerging plan and a strategic approach to ensure that as a council, we are aiming to improve digital literacy and to tackle digital poverty in Doncaster. Now, I've explained that as earlier on as something that, you know, can be a bit of a barrier. Can you explain that further, please?
Yeah, I'll just come in on that if that's okay, Councillor Needham. Yeah, so we do have a Team Doncaster approach to this, and it's very much a partnership approach with our colleagues in the ICB, RDash, St Ledger and the voluntary and community sector. And what we have is something called the Wellbeing Essentials group, which has been basically looking at the whole response to the cost of living crisis in a whole range of different ways, but digital inclusion is one of the key strands of work that's been looked at through that group. And we have a number of kind of interventions in place that are there to support communities. If I just give a bit of an example, and the way that it's been described is we're trying to create an ecosystem of support in a whole range of different ways that supports people in different types of their exclusion. So the first one is really kind of listening and understanding about what some of the barriers are, and there's various work that's been done to try and understand those barriers. And there's been a How Connected Are You survey that's been done over the last few months. And then using that survey to kind of guide what we do and where we intervene. So I mentioned that ecosystem of support. That includes a range of skills and resources, basically from local and national partners, to provide a kind of flexible amount of support that we've got. And I'll give some examples about that where possible. So one is we've given out, just since July this year, 94 devices to individuals and groups through different referral routes, including Citizens Advice, Job Centre, Migrant Support, Hygiene Bank, Home Instead charity, and also approved some connectivity grants to different community groups. There's also digital skills training and device incentives across all 4 localities. That's been provided in different locations, but always those familiar and trusted ones, such as community libraries. And there's flexible support available as well, for example, including the NHS app drop-in sessions to help people engage and manage their health online. And then just in terms of helping to connect all this together, there's a growing and ever enlarging network of digital champions across the whole of the city. And that includes organisations like Barclays, who are putting they call them their digital eagles, that are helping to support that. And then just to back all that up, because obviously there's a huge issue around safety, online safety. We're working with partners like South Yorkshire Police and the NSPCC to promote online safety, basically to help and educate people around the dangers so that they're protected and make sure that they feel safe while using online technology. And there's quite a bit of detail on some of this if it's helpful to share, and an understanding of how different sections, I'll get my teeth in, and segments of Doncaster are being supported, whether they're people who are homeless, Gypsy Roma traveller community, those are particularly in poverty or on a low income, etc. So just to sort of show how some of that activity is being targeted. And a lot of this work is being coordinated by our colleagues in the NHS through the ICB. So there's a really good Team Doncaster approach to this work. It's a never done though. It's a never done and never finished. There can never be enough activity in this area. Thank you.
Thank you. Has anybody else got any questions? Yeah, sorry.
So my first point was, you mentioned about an Are You Connected survey. I just wondered if that were done online. Right. Okay. Thank you. That would have been super ironic, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. It would.
And then, and then the other question is, in the work that I do as an elected member, and also through community work and food support service and such like, the biggest area of people that are denied access are our senior residents. So I wondered if there's anything that's been highlighted specifically in a world that generally, even if you want to report your bin's not been emptied, you've got to do it online. So I wondered if that kind of audience has been targeted for any kind of additional support, or some places where they can actually, go and learn new skills.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a number of ways that we're doing that. There's a specific digital inclusion program from the NHS, which is particularly targeting those older residents, and we're also working particularly with Age UK and specialist organisations that represent that demographic of the population, so that the support can be targeted and integrated with other support that's provided. So the idea of those trusted partners and those trusted networks that this support can be channeled through and directed with, I think is really important in this work.
Do we have any examples of that? Because I hear what you're saying about, it's available and, all these different ages are involved. But, I don't know any of our senior residents in Armthorpe, for example, who'll say, I've been on this course, I've got access to this. I'm just interested.
So, sorry, Lee. Just specifically around the NHS Digital Inclusion Programme, we attended I can't remember what event it was that we were at, Lee, but we did a little workshop with the NHS Digital Inclusion Manager, and they showed some real evidence of where it's actually been really positive intervention. I'll see if I can find that link for you, because they forwarded on to us some video evidence of how it's working and how it's actually connecting our senior colleagues, our senior citizens into digital inclusion. So I'll see if I can find that and I'll forward it on.
And I will provide. There is quite a lot of detail in some presentation that I've got as well, so I can circulate that as well, which has got some of the details I've been talking through in it as well.
Thank you. Just in terms of hand-holding, that'd be really useful.
Thank you. We will move on to the last section, but it'd be good if we could have a bit more information on the next report that's under that priority, because we don't always get a huge amount. So that'd be good.
Yeah, if I could, Chair, one suggestion I was going to make was that for the relevant scrutiny panel, I do think it'd be useful to ask if we could have some more information from the MCA about its programme and what that means for us and how we're linked to it. And it was just on the point that Councillor Needham raised. I think we as an authority, from a customer service perspective, need to balance the electric or electronic provision of services and accessibility to service with client need as well. And a good example of that has been some of the work that we've done to improve facilities and arrangements in taxi licensing, because it's fine having an automated system, it's fine having channel shift, but if that presents a challenge for your customer, there's a need to make sure the system is sufficiently accessible in alternative ways, not to the detriment of trying to do channel shift, because channel shift gives you the efficiencies, but also educating those people in how that doesn't work. And I think we've got some areas we could improve some of those systems where there is a reliance on technology, and is that technology the right type of technology? So, email systems for service requests when actually can be done slicker and quicker, because some of the stuff that we do, which is heavily service request based because it's place based, is email systems which actually then need manual sifting. So it's kind of a little bit self-defeating. So I think there's some improvements that we can make. But I think there's been some learning experience about you can go for channel shift. And it's a bit like when we went cashless, if you remember. We went cashless years ago, but still people had a preference, and you get there eventually. But I do think it's about recognising that one mode of engagement is not singularly what everybody wants. And sometimes there's an education piece on that.
Yeah, I think the quote is one size fits one size does not fit all, and I think that's what you're trying to say.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the final section, tackling climate change. Steve, you've got a question first. Sorry.
Thank you, and thank you for that reference with taxis. Please, we're getting somewhere. But the question, when can we see an improvement in the number of houses being retrofitted?
So I think it's interesting, it's a timely question, and I've seen the figures within there. So if I just give some initial response to the improvement, the figure that I've been quoted for grants that will be accessible and delivered, not necessarily works, is now 269 before the end of the year. But there's a bit of a challenge in that some of those, a big proportion of those, is 140 of those that won't start until January. Just to give you a bit of context, and I know there's an issue about the targets and the risk sometimes of getting funding, not achieving all the delivery of the funding and giving the funding back. But we have secured since 2011 as an authority 13.6 million for some of this retrofit. And we also have to recognise we've got an ageing stock. And if I'm talking about our stock, or certainly just stock that they manage on our behalf, never mind the 25,000 PRS, never mind the 100,000 of home owners. And what we've had to do as well is work with quite a lot of different funding streams, so 4 or 5 different funding streams, either coming through the MCA or coming through government. And for our stock, the added complexity is aligning that to your already programmed investment. So it's not quite as straightforward as sometimes it's, you know, well, let's just put cladding on a number of houses or give them a new boiler or give them better wall and loft insulation. So what I'm saying is it's welcome, but it is a bit of a challenge for us. Some of the problems that we've had in terms of delivery and in terms of the numbers has just been accessibility to the trades, because there's quite a lot of other people doing it. There have been some issues, I think, with reliability in there. And we need to not forget as well, some of these works, because you're looking at the EPC rating and shifting the stock to a better EPC rating, because if it's more energy efficient, it's not using as much, you know, gas and having less carbon impact. They're quite intrusive as well. So you can't do these without getting in, and that can lead us sometimes to challenges because there's still homes that people are in. So I think there's been a mixture of challenges for us. Series of funding streams, aligning it to our own investment, accessibility, and then market pressures. And of course, the other problem that we've got is nothing in terms of your works on your home is getting cheaper. So you'll get an amount at a particular time and a target to do a number of houses, but then what you're finding is that the costs have gone up. One of the things that we are looking at with some of the next round of funding that's coming through is particular types of properties with particular focused intervention. So I think there's the 21 in there, and it's quite resource intensive, but it'll give you an idea about the effectiveness, because for those of you who've been privy to some of the discussions about the council house stock, to get the council house stock to an energy efficiency position where it supports carbon neutrality by 2040 or 85% reduction in your carbon footprint as a council by 2035, you're talking an eye-watering amount of money. Absolutely. Because we've got, you know, ageing stock, which we've got high-rise, which again are a challenge for us in terms of longevity and alternative provision. So it is complex. I would always start with a positive. We've attracted money, we've secured it, we've delivered. It's always a challenge when we have to give money back. But for me, as a director, if we do end up not being able to deliver, it has to be for justifiable reasons. And I think in some instances it is, because they're somewhat beyond our control. But we need to learn from those as well going forward. I think if we could consolidate nationally a programme for, you know, for public sector housing, that would help. But the other tip of the iceberg is the private rented sector as well, and people who, you know, may have their own homes but not be able to insulate it or heat it properly, who are actually untouched by some of this. We did have some element of the retrofit for the private sector, but again, that proved a challenge because people had to put some of their own money in as well. So they're not going to necessarily make that choice. And also in terms of priorities on homes, sometimes people will think, well, I'll not have that done. I'll, you know, do the garden, or I'll do something else instead, or I'll keep my money. So it is presenting us with a bit of a challenge going forward. But I'm pleased with the progress that's been made, but it's fair to say it's not been easy.
Thank you. I think, and yeah, I think it'd be different to have a one-size-fits-all thing, because it won't fit anything. Because I mean, same as St Ledger housing stock and all the housing stock in Doncaster, it's different and built at different times. So has different thermal properties. But it concerns me, and I've spoke to Dave about it before, is the education of residents within council housing stock, of how they would deal with mould issues when the house has been insulated, because it causes other issues that are moving on. And I've not seen as yet that there's been anything there to actually go out and speak to the residents about mould issues, because obviously you need circulation, which brings to draft. You shut that draft off, it's just still air. But it's good to hear that there is some movement. It'd be nice to know if it's going to be achievable by, well, you just said 2035. I very much doubt it. But, you know, I mean, we need to be looking at carbon air pumps, we need to be looking at other things and not necessarily fitting gas boilers, which have got a life expectancy of, what, 15, 20 years. So we're massively going over that target.
Chair, the 2035 target is within our environment and sustainability strategy, the 111 actions. That's 80% reduction in the city or borough-wide carbon footprint by 2035, and then in effect being carbon neutral by 2040. What I would say is our housing stock is only a part of that. Our buildings are only a part of that. What we do are only a part of that. I think where the authority has a pivotal role is in stewardship, because the reality is there's private sector entities out there that are emitting carbon. What are they doing about it? And we've done some work on that, but that is a bit of a big challenge for us, because not only is it managing your own house, it's also what others are doing to contribute to that target as a city. Aspirational as a target, yes. Deliverable, I think, well, we'll have to wait and see.
Pardon me. Just finish off with Councillor Cobby's question.
Thank you, Chair. I think we started a bit of a discussion on it, but what engagement is there with partners, schools and businesses to help meet the ambitious emission reduction targets in Doncaster?
So forgive me because I'm just having to move so I can see. so I can see. So I talked a little bit previously about the targets, and it's actually quite a good point as well, because we can't do this solely on our own. So, as I said, it's not just DCC. I think there's a clarity on our role. I think that's recognised in terms of stewardship. In terms of the schools and businesses, we've been looking at this through Team Doncaster to bring people together to see what they're doing and their contribution. What we have been able to do quite positively with the schools is facilitate the tree planting as well. And I also think, working with colleagues across in CYP, there's a need to make sure that that becomes an integral part of the school programme, so that children are understanding of the environment and the consequences of, you know, carbon impact and behaviours. Because actually, when you look around this room, probably the replacement for us in 50 odd years will behave perhaps slightly differently, because they understand things, you know, because of the way that they've been educated and they've been schooled. I think on businesses it's a bit of a wider challenge. We've had quite a lot of success in terms of grants and delivery to small to medium enterprises. But what you find in some of that dialogue, particularly with small to medium enterprises, in terms of what can you do to help us meet this target, they tend to be focused more on delivery of the business and maintaining the business. So actually I think there's a real role about educating and explaining what is available to them to assist them with reducing their emissions and also, you know, their costs. I think with bigger businesses, I think that's a piece of work that we've got to strengthen a little bit about some of the larger employers. And one of the other problems that we've got in terms of the engagement, and I know it's a question that's in there, I don't know if it will be asked, but there's a real challenge about balancing economic growth and sustainability, because economic growth tends to be glass, steel and concrete in some respects, not solely, because it's about skills, but then you've got the environmental consequence of that in terms of its construction and loss of habitat, and we've got quite a lot of policies within the local plan to help us protect and preserve the environment. But I think predominantly the work with schools and with businesses is through through Team Doncaster, but I think with businesses, I think we could strengthen some of those arrangements, particularly some of the larger entities. I think there's a role for us in the Chamber with that.
Thank you. It would be good to know like a bit more percentage of those businesses engaging, so then we know like how many we're reaching and what work we need to be doing. So that's interesting.
Yeah, leave that with me, and that's something that I can provide you with.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. You'll probably be very pleased to know we've reached the end. Recommendations, which I'm now lost, of course, moved me bits of paper around. Thank you, Caroline. So the committee's, page 32, paragraph 9. Committee asked to note and comment on the Q2 performance of financial information. Do you agree and note the discussion, everybody?
Noted, Chair.
Thank you very much. We just need to, the last section is the overview and scrutiny work plan. Has anybody got anything they particularly want to say about the current work plan? And has anybody got any thoughts from the meeting? And do come back if they occur to you later about any issues you might want to put on the work plan for further investigation. Yeah, Caroline, yeah.
So it's just to make members of OSMC, and it'll be health aware that there'll be a meeting coming up for the health and wellbeing strategy next year to feed in your views possibly. So I'll confirm that later.
Anybody got anything they want to raise now? Okay, I think in that case we'll close the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody.